zapraszamy pana profesora Mateusza Gyurkowicha.
I would like to invite Professor Gyurkovich to take the floor.
Prezentacja jest gotowa.
The presentation is ready, so please go ahead.
Thank you very much. I'm very grateful for this invitation. The title of this presentation is The Death of Avant-Garde or Return to the Roots. Well, avant-garde movements of the early 20th century were built on economic, political and cultural currents and trends that were changing the concept of the world, and changes in the architecture they were considered revolutionary. And as we heard from Professor Gzel, as we heard from other speakers today, actually every avant-garde was revolutionary in a way. All avant-garde movements were marked by the negation of historizing forms and traditional urbanism as an emanation of social oppression. Architecture, freed from their baggage, was to become egalitarian, and the new technology was to favor the mass production of buildings and cities for a modern society. So after the Great War, World War I, was the right for delivery of these ideas with need for apartments, need for residential architecture, made this residential architecture, which seemed the key tissue of the city, seemed the most susceptible to these changes and the most revolutionary, both in Western Europe, largely German residential settlements, but also in Poland. And its forms, typologies, initially very simple, deprived of retail, and very simple, they were the packagine for the function of a flat, and they evolved. Le Corbusier's machine for living was an avant-garde resolution, and it becomes an inspiration for thousands of residential buildings, and sometimes an inspiration that was not quite clearly understood. On the contrary, even when we speak about buildings erected in the 21st century. The technological development that we have been observing over the last century, as Professor Suchocka said, meant that over time almost all dreams of architects could be built. So following the strangeness, ignoring the costs of building and operating the facilities, led to the fact that the social sensitivity of architecture and its useful servitude were lost along the way for the sake of shocking with a form. For a couple of decades, expressionist, deconstructive, or biomorphic forms, alternating with minimalist, austere architecture, or the so-called new modernism, defined the main trends of architecture, considered avant-garde trends of the turn of the 20th and 21st centuries. These works were awarded by international bodies, which also contributed to the ennoblement of a fairly small groups of the most avant-garde architects. The most important architectural awards, Pritzker Prize and EU Mies van der Rohe Architectural Award awarded in the last few years, show the rejection of the mainstream of this kind of star architecture by the elite. Cities and private investors decided to employ and hire well-known creators, hoping that their creations will become contemporary points of attraction, the symbols of modernity of the commissioners. However, this uncontextual architecture of the performance did not always fulfill its goals correctly, and contrary to the Bilbao effect, did not solve urban problems but created new ones. So that is connected with limiting unnecessary spendings and unwillingness to make risky, hasty decisions. So as a result, we can see some changes. We can see the end of the extravagant era in favor of more socially sensitive architecture. So David Chipperfield received an award for the restored Neues Museum in Berlin in 2011, but in Pritzker Prize in 2016 went to Alejandro Aravena of Chile. These awards, as you well know, they are usually granted for lifetime achievement, and so far it has been given to architects with enormous intellectual recognition, and then almost all well-known architects. But this time, again, the emphasis was put on the old life works. The same architect, Alejandro Aravena, also received other awards. In 2019, the EU Mies van der Rohe Architecture Award, the BDA Grand Prize, and Pritzker Prize in 2021. His Quinta Monroy, residential housing in state in Iquique, was mainly presented as promoting the architect's work in the architectural press. It was the social creation the residents themselves could shape, obviously within a certain model that was imposed by the architect. They should create the details and the finishing of their houses. So this way, in his approach to social issues and the mass nature of architectural work, Aravena's work is closer to the fourth modernist avant-garde and the last of the 21st century avant-garde architects appreciated with global awards before him. Successive international awards only confirmed this trend. In 2019, the EU Mies van der Rohe Architecture Award, in 2020, the BDA Grand Prize, and in 2021, the Pritzker Prize went to French architects Anne Lacaton and Jean-Philippe Vassal. The studio specializes in interventions and transformations of the existing urban tissue, often including adaptations of buildings and housing complexes erected in industrialized technologies in the second half of the 20th century. This year's Pritzker Prize, Pritzker 2022, for Diebe Francis Kere from Burkina Faso confirms the trend of seeking contemporary avant-garde in social architecture. So this is not an architectural form, so created largely for local needs and with the participation of local communities. As in the case of the achievements of the aforementioned artists, Aravena and Lacaton Vassal studio, Kere's output, although formally very interesting, is clearly different from the main trends of world architecture that we have observed over the last few decades. It is a low-budget architecture and inexpensive, in which environmental problems related to climate change and social issues come to the fore. This architecture can be implemented only in broad participation with the local community, its future users.
Wydawało się, że
One
nagrody
would think that
architektoniczne
these architectural
przyznawane na arenie
prizes
globalnej
and
przez
awards
międzynarodowe gremia
awarded on the global
twórców,
arena
krytyków
by
architektury
groups of critics and
nobilitują
creators of
najbardziej
architecture
wpływowych twórców bądź grupy
recognize the most influential creators and then define the concept of architecture
sankcjonowana
and
przez nie, a
non-architecture.
skomercjalizowana
Is it
awangarda
really
w
true?
znaku starej architektury
Is that
realizowana nadal na Dalekim
so?
Wschodzie właściwie w Europie umarła.
Well, architecture basically died in Europe. No one is surprised anymore, and architecture does not bring new contact with it. It seems that the social and environmental involvement of contemporary award-winning artists is closer to the spirit of the avant-garde movement from 100 years ago. But will their work, however, stand the test of time, as it happened in the case of the achievements of the first modernism? The time will show. Is that the only avant-garde that in the crisis caused by the war, the pandemic, and the economic difficulties we can afford? Well, time will tell. Thank you.